Let me introduce Darwish Al Emadi. I asked both of them to give me a very brief bio. I won't take long, but I just want you to know a little bit more about them. Darwish graduated from Edinburgh in sociolinguistics, 1985. Joined Qatar University in 1995, where he has performed a series of administrative responsibilities, including Dean of Humanities, Dean of the Graduate School, and currently Director of CESPI, the Social and Economic Survey Research Institute. He's also an Associate VP for Research at the Qatar University, and I'm also very proud to say that he is the Chairman of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the World Value Survey. He will talk about the experience of conducting surveys in Qatar. So Darwish, you have the
floor. Good morning. This is my only thing that actually I learned this morning. And good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like really to thank Eduardo and Tatiana for really inviting me to this conference. And it really gave me a great experience meeting really new set of people, and seeing new culture, I read something about Russia, but it's not like being actually in the country. So thank you very much. My presentation today will be methodological. So we'll not have data actually to analyze, no coefficients and no correlation type of thing. But really, I'm going to talk about how we do survey in countries where are somehow different than the West. Not only in terms of culture, but also in terms of the population composition, what I call it actually population pyramid. The countries that actually I'm going to talk about is known as GCC countries, and GCC stands for Gulf Cooperation Council. And basically it actually includes 6 different countries. I mean, for those who don't know, we are here talking about Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait. And as you see, actually, these countries are not similar in size. I mean, out of GCC countries, Saudi Arabia is by far the largest in terms of land and in terms of population. Whereas Bahrain is very tiny. I mean, the whole size of Bahrain is 550 square kilometers. So it's very tiny island. And then there's Qatar, second in size, then Kuwait, then UAE, Oman, and then Bahrain. In terms of population, it's not really in the same order. Again, Saudi Arabia is the largest, but Oman is the second largest, Kuwait, and UAE is far more than Bahrain, then Qatar. So Qatar is the smallest in terms of size of population. And what actually distinguishes these countries are actually that they are all relatively new in the sense of being countries. I mean, most of these countries in the 18th century did not exist as separate entities. They were really borders were very fluid. They were not really demarcation of any sort. And the actual demarcation of these countries primarily actually occurred at the late of in 1990, in 1989 or 1987, towards the end of the 19th century. These are just, I'm going to give some features actually of this country. These countries primarily actually depend on oil and gas as natural resources. They are quite rich actually in GDP. This is just a shot of GDP per capita in these countries. As you see actually, Qatar is by far, in terms of GDP, it's really outstanding. Even in the world ranking, it's really very. And that's because it has huge revenues from oil and gas, but very limited population. And I put US so you really see the comparison between them. Again, Oman and Bahrain relatively are not really as rich as others. Again, some of the other features that all we are talking about Islamic countries, and there are in most of these countries actually there are more restrictive interpretation of Islam than actually you, for example, find in Syria or in Egypt. You know, as we know, different religions have different interpretations, and some people tend to go to one end rather than other. But even within these countries are not the same. So you find even a stricter interpretation of Islam in Saudi Arabia than it is in Bahrain or in UAE, for example, or in Kuwait. Again, one of the other things that is really featured in these countries is fastly growing economies. So in the past 2 decades, it's been really accelerating in terms of economy, and then in terms of what we call it population expansion. I'm going to come to that very shortly. Because of this expanding economy, actually, it attracted lots of migration. So going back to my question to Chris earlier today, this is the country actually where it's primarily, when we talk about migration, it is incoming. So no one is actually going out of these countries. It is primarily everybody is actually going to these countries. The topics that I will cover primarily will be actually 3 things. First, I'll give you an idea about the population structure in these countries, but focus very much on Qatar because that is what I know most about. And then the challenges, actually, I take Qatar as an example, but what I say in Qatar probably is also true from other GCC countries. And then some measures how actually we tackle these ones. If we actually look at population in Qatar, the composition, what we found is actually that, for example, if we look at in all these countries, we'll find that nationals are minorities. And some of them are really real minorities. I mean, if we look in Bahrain, population is about 50% nationals and the other 50 is non-nationals. In Kuwait, it is 1/3 nationals. Saudi Arabia, Oman is about half, more than half. Saudi Arabia is slightly more. But UAE and Qatar are really peculiar. They are really, we have a problem in terms of nationals in the country. They are really minorities in their own countries. And this is very unique. I don't think anywhere in the world you will find actually a country where nationals are minorities within their own countries. So we are not talking about particular ethnic group, that's the whole lot. And this actually, if we look at this case, in 2000, I'm referring to Qatar, but very much, Dr. Mahmoud can actually correct me, but very much UAE experienced the same thing. We really had what we call it population explosion in the last decade. In 2004, when the census was actually carried out in Qatar, the whole population was actually 750,000. And after 10 years, now the population is 2.4 million. So we had an influx of people actually in Qatar of like 1.7 million within just 10 years. And that is primarily expats and foreign workers. So this is, the picture we see, the result of this is huge influx of foreign laborers in the country. Okay, that's and then if we actually look at labor force, is even worse. By labor force, I mean people who are really economically active, people who are just working, have some sort of jobs. Again, if you look at these countries, then even the picture becomes even more concerning. I mean, if you look at Bahrain, which actually had 48% of the natives, in actual labor force, it's only 25%. Oman, Kuwait, where actually it was 31, it is only 17%. Qatar, which was 14, is only 6%. In fact, nowadays, as we speak, it's about 5.5%. UAE is the same thing, about 7%. So even in terms of workforce, it's even worse. I mean, the nationals are really a huge minority. Of course, because of the influx of this migration, and most of them are what we call them blue-collar workers. These are the workers who work in construction and low-paid jobs. And they are primarily singles, in their between 18 and 40 years old and have very moderate level of education. And that actually leaves the ratio between men and women in these countries totally unbalanced. So for example, in countries like Qatar, the men actually constitute 83% of the population. Well, if you look at just Qatar, it is balanced. It is 50.5 and 49.5 like any other community. But it is actually, if you include everybody, that then the situation becomes very much different. And again, the same thing, what you find is actually this is a predominantly also male society. Okay, the whole lot. It's the wrong time to receive a call.
Don't worry, I can answer.
Well, we only actually it's the only time that actually my telephone rang during the conference day. It's at the wrong time. And then again, for age group, it's similar problem. As I said, most of these workers actually will come and tend to be very young. So you will find actually the age group that is 15 almost is very, very big. People who are about 65 are really, almost nothing. Again, we are talking everything together. If we actually had, I wish I had a slide for Qatari, but the Qatari society looks very normal like any other society. If we just take Qataris by themselves, not really including everybody. But when you put everybody together, then really you will find, and as I said, this line that actually says foreign laborers normally they have contracts for 3 to 5 years. It creates a problem of a different sort that they will come towards the end of this representation. So primarily it's also very young, if we can conclude everybody. Now, okay, given that population structure really presents a particular set of problems for doing surveys in the country. These are some general actually problems that actually probably apply to all GCC countries. There is little research done on surveys in terms of methodology in the GCC countries because the whole idea of survey is really also new to the country. I mean, people are not aware of surveys, so it's not like they are being surveyed every day. Because I think most of the societies where actually survey predominant is also associated with election, with freedom, with what we call it active participation in decision making. So I think we really need to focus a bit on developing methodologies that is really applicable to the region, rather than just adopt something that is used in the United States or Spain or in Europe, because it may or may not work. And again, when you talk about surveys, most of the people, the thing that comes to their mind is political issues. And in most of these countries, people do like to talk about political issues to great deals, because of certain restriction. I think one of the other things is that whenever you do a survey, you need to take permission from authorities on the questionnaire, the type of question that will be allowed to ask. They sometimes ask you to modify a few words. Sometimes they say, well, don't give this a question because we don't want it at this time. For example, what I know for sure is that if we want to ask about Shias and Sunnis in Qatar, it will be very difficult. The government does not actually like it because they said it will just prompt unnecessary tension between the two sectors that we don't have it, for example, in Qatar, and therefore there's no need to ask about it. By asking it, you are just inviting for trouble. So that's the interpretation they give you. Okay, so I'm just giving you an idea about certain things that actually probably you are advised or not being permitted to do. And there are actually certain sensitive topics. So for example, in the United States, it is very common that you have, if you open New York Times or USA Today, to find the rating of the president. How is he doing on a daily basis? Well, you can't ask that in any of these countries. just a fact of life, okay, and you have to live with it. So things that you take it very, later on you have some other sensitive issues like name of females, sometimes can be, and I know people find it very strange, but in different societies, different things tend to be very sensitive than that. Now, with this diversity, with laborers coming from different countries, they don't come from, this is the case of Qatar, they don't come all from one country. They are come from, we have United States, UK, Palestine, Ethiopia, Lebanon, Iran, Indonesia. These are set of countries that actually come. There are, of course, others. Now, how are you going to do a survey in a country where all these languages are spoken? And remember, not all of them speak Arabic, and not all of them speak English. So this Nepali guy, they only speak Nepali. They don't speak even Urdu or any other language or Filipino. Many Indians don't speak any other local language. And, well, the Sudanese, Jordanians, they have their own version of Arabic as well. So this is a problem of different types. And this actually, I think, is very much true of UAE, for example. If we take UAE, I'll be surprised if it's not similar. But maybe in terms of percentage, Jordanian will be more than Egyptian. Yeah, okay, but in terms of the composition, probably it will be the same nationalities.
We have more.
You have even more.
200.
Yeah. So this really presents how many languages. How many languages you can actually accommodate. So it's not just one or two languages. In fact, when we do survey that in Qatar, that what we call it, the whole population, that is Qataris and non-Qataris all together, we actually do it in 6 different languages. And that puts a lot of burden on the institute in terms of money, in terms of resources, in terms of time. So you need actually a pool of interviewers, a pool of who speak that language fluently, who also understand the content, have some background. You need to train them. You need reliable translators, people who check. So it's not an easy thing. So I think, and then of course, you need pre-testing for each translation. All these mechanisms that we put in place before actually we feel now, and also normally actually when it comes to sampling, there's even another problem. The common methodology that actually is used is what we call it last birthday method, where actually you just go and you say the last birthday and you pick that person. Well, this is actually a problem because birthday is not celebrated in these, well, at least in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, to among the nationals. We don't. So if you ask me honestly, what is the birthday of myself, I don't know. I honestly don't know which day I was born in. I know you'll be surprised, but honestly I don't know, because at the time that we were born, we didn't have those records. So honestly, I don't know which day actually I was born. So I have in my passport the 1st of January. So anybody who is actually 1st of January, you know that is not true. If you ask about my wife or my kids, honestly I don't know. I need to check their passport. I don't know, because we don't celebrate it. So if you ask people actually, if you go into a household and ask about last birthday, it's very useless question because they don't know. So we actually abandoned that. It just simply did not work. And then the other method that actually is normally used in doing selecting and respondents is what is known as Kish method, where actually you basically go and ask about everybody, put a roster, and then randomly select one of those. Well, it may look fine, except there are 2 problems that actually with this. The first one is actually, this is good if the household, there are not too many people in it. 4 or 5 people, you can actually write them down. But in households where are actually 7 or 10 people, it becomes a problematic. It's time consuming. And I think there's a more serious one. If you ask people actually, at least among Qataris, what is your mother's name, probably you will be upset. Because that is something, it's more like, well, said, why do you want to my mother's name? I remember when I was a kid actually in school, we were given a form to fill for the exam. And in that form, we had to write the name of the father and name of mother. I remember when I was a kid, for 10 years old, we made sure that actually people don't see the name of my mother. So we never filled, because they thought that was teaching issue. So I know it sounds very strange, but people don't, the feminine name, it's getting better now. I mean, with the widespread education and media and women working, but still it's a problem and for certain part of the community. So we also abandoned this for these 2 reasons. So we actually came up with a new way. So we proposed actually to sample person in the household. So basically the way we do it is, I'm going to talk about it, but you can see it in the slide later on. It basically, we go in a house and actually we ask how many people are there, just in terms of number. And then if it is one person, if that unit is being selected, determined of the source of interviewer, when you ask how many people, if it is just one person, then automatically he will be selected. Now if there are 2 persons, then the chances of him being selected or the other is 50-50. And so on. So if there are 3 or 4, well, if it is more than 4, then we ask about the gender, how many male and how many female, and then we actually randomly select one of the 2 based on this. So if there are 3, for example, we say are they younger than you or older. If it's younger, then we just select. Again, it is a random selection. So there are 3 people actually, the interviewer, the people who respond, and then there's 2 guys, one is older and one is younger. Then the chances actually is one of them being selected is just 33% or so. So that is how actually we do it. So I'm gonna skip these ones. So if there are 5 actually, and there is actually a paper we wrote about this, and it is published in the International Journal of Public Opinion, okay, it's in 2013, about this method. And we found that this is really very applicable, and it's not sensitive really, people cooperate, and so this is actually what we call it within household sampling technique. Now another issue is the really gender issue. When we started in 2010, in the first survey, we actually surveyed people. At the end of that survey, which just happened to be right after the World Body Survey, we did our second survey. We put actually a battery question: what time of the day that you like to be interviewed? Do you like to be interviewed at the weekend? And who you like to be interviewed by, male or female? All the females said that actually they like to be interviewed in future by females. So that actually is a question. We have to make sure that actually when the selected member of that household is a female, make sure that actually we send a female, because it's no point in sending somebody that people do not like to cooperate with. But then it also raises the gender issues about respondents, all other things. But so basically what we in this thing is, nowadays this is the technique that we use. Is once actually the frame is selected, from the frame we select actually the units that we would like to draw our interviewers from those units. We actually predetermine the gender of each part. For example, house number 1, house number 2, 3, 4, 5, if there are 100, we say the number 1, all the odd numbers, for example, we just select the female from those houses, and all the even numbers we select male, for example. Then automatically the people actually who go to interview and the odd numbers will be female, and those who go to this, we found it actually okay, I'll try to finish it. So we found this is very economically viable, because it actually saves time and money. If we know in advance which house actually, what type of respondents we are asking. Okay, I'm trying to. Again, this is we actually published a paper in 2014 on the same thing. Now, the last component is labor camps. I mean, good chunk of population actually are laborers, and laborers have a unique case because they are single, as I said, they are young, but they also live in camps. So they are not actually, they have the compounds of their own, normally in the outskirts of the city, but they are by themselves. And we are talking about the huge camps. Some of them, there are 500 people in them. Some of them have actually about 50, 60 different rooms. So in each, again, so these are really the units. So basically there are, what we do with these camps is, if we would actually wanted to include laborers in our sample, is we randomly select the camps, then somebody actually who is the head of the supervisor will pay a visit a day in advance, selects 1 or 2 rooms randomly, and then also select one of the, because in each room there are about 5 or sometimes 6 or 7 people living in the same room. Yes, these are big rooms, and so they select one and then determine the language. So the next day or 2 days later, when we have the appointment, the person who speaks that language goes and actually carries out the interview. So it's not an easy business. And there is another issue, because of the nature of the compounds, sometimes it's very difficult to get them really separated and split in isolation. So we have also to make sure that actually they are not influenced by other people in that room when actually they respond. So it's okay. Now, I think there are other challenges. One of the main challenges is really we still have not identified a clear channel of communicating to policymakers about policy issues. I mean, in the West it's very easy. You have a very clear channel. You have, for example, in the United States, you have advocacy groups, you have congressmen who you can on the local level, you have representatives who can actually you can communicate with and try to, what do you call it, buy into your idea and then be an advocate for that particular thing. Well, in Qatar and to a large extent in most of these countries, really this channel is not very clear. So you go through media channels, sometimes you do public things, sometimes invite these influential people to your round table, hopefully that they will buy into the idea and so on. So I think more importantly, I'd like to focus on this, the last point, which is monitoring change for the whole population. Given that the turnover of the workforce, that they're going to stay there for a long time, most of them stay for 5, 6, probably 10 years, and then they leave. Yeah. How are we going to actually monitor this? Yes, for the indigenous population, and for people who stay there for a long time, it's not a problem, but there's a huge turnover. And this is really, I think, will be very challenging. I mean, if we take the whole population, for example, in World Value Survey, and after 5 years we do and we find there's a big change. Now how can you determine this is a change because of a change, or is it a change because there is just a new set of people moved into the country? Okay, I'll stop here actually, and before actually I've been shown a red card, okay, it's already yellow. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Darwish. We have perfect time to open these for questions and comments. Since I have the microphone, I would like to pose a question and then perhaps take 2 or 3 more, if you don't mind. I was wondering if in the survey experience that you have had in Qatar, there has been attempts to conduct panel studies, and if so, I would imagine since some of the ones we conducted in Mexico, the identification for respondents has to do mostly with birthday, what would be the equivalent in Qatar. But that's just because I was wondering. If you want, let's pick up a few questions or comments. Anyone? Yes, Rima?
Thank you very much. It just sounds so different, and it was really interesting to hear about this. I'm wondering, does it flag in the data set whether people are in the labor camps, and whether you could say a little more about what you're finding when you do analyze the data?
I didn't get the question. Could you just explain a bit? I mean,
So say somebody wanted to analyze the data, does it, like you sample from these different places, but does it flag? Is there a way that people know that that person came from?
Yes,
when
yes, they do have.
It's all there in
Yeah.
the data set?
yeah, we have that.
Yeah.
I mean, to us, we don't do actually, we have not done any panel study yet, but definitely we actually think about this. We have get some experience from other people also.
Don has a question?
I was thinking of exactly the same thing, that this tremendous variety of people is a nice opportunity for analyzing the values of people from different nationalities in the same setting. The Bangladeshi, the Indians, the Nepali, etc., are sufficiently large number of people that you could compare their values with those of the Bangladeshi or Nepali population. And in fact, this is our only sample from Nepal. This is probably a remarkable opportunity for examining. Actually, Alejandro's done something like this, basically analyzing the values of Mexicans in Mexico and of Mexicans in the United States compared with both Mexico and the United States. And he finds that the Mexicans in the United States, to some extent, have the values of Mexico, but considerably they're about halfway. The first generation is about halfway to the American values, and the second generation even farther. And you wouldn't have that phenomenon, but you would have the ability to compare to what extent do these people retain the values of Nepal or Bangladesh or India.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, just one point I probably did not mention is that we actually do like 4 or 5 surveys a year where we include the whole population, and we actually use 3 subsets of samples. So we use one subset sample for Qataris, one for laborers, and one for the white-collar expat who are actually in town, in the country. And normally those samples about 3,000 respondents. So, and we distinctly actually keep them separate for analysis purpose, because if you put them together, then the whole idea will be lost. But we'll actually, for the next wave, honestly, I'm thinking very clearly about enlarging the sample and taking the whole subset rather than one. But as I said, it's maybe the idea of translation becomes a problem. Okay? But as far as yes, we probably could do something about it.
I think you have a question here by Edward.
Yes, so panel study of course would make only sense for the Qatari citizens, but then an important issue is how to identify the people properly. So if the birthday is not a very good way to identify them, I have a question about your sampling technique. So you suggest that you sample them within gender. Now within gender, do you identify them by names or by positions? That is, this is the wife of the head of the household, this is the son's wife, and so on. Or
No, basically what we do is the following, is that, for example, if let's say they choose my house, and then it was actually designated for a female. So the first part of the interview is really will be to identify how many females in that house.
right.
And then are they actually older or younger or the same age of the person actually who is responding, and then randomly one of them will be selected for those categories. That's how we actually do it.
Okay, so without asking names.
No, without asking names.
Just
So we ask actually about
relative
just older or younger or the same age, and then somebody will be selected randomly from that. What?
Yeah, I have one question and one comment. The question is, in Spain, when we are interviewing people, and there are many people in the household, sometimes the interviewers are allowed to ask the person whether they he or she would mind having the interview maybe in a nearby cafe to avoid the pressure of people, very close to the respondent. I don't know whether that might be also possible for you in some cases. And the second, the comment is that we also have made this kind of comparison between Moroccans living in Spain and having their answers compared to those of Moroccans in Morocco. And for example, with the question that we have been using about how important is God in your life, in Morocco, the answer, the average was 9, on a scale 0 to 10, it was 9 points. And for Spaniards, it was about 5, like most Europeans, and Moroccan immigrants were about 7. So I think that would probably give you the possibility to monitor the integration of migrants in Qatar. So you might have a kind of secondary benefit from having in your sample people who are not Qataris. That would give you the idea of how long it takes them to really get integrated in terms of their values.
Yeah, I think, I was just talking about the World Value Survey, but in other surveys we actually include them. So there are actually a survey that we do every other year, and that's primarily designed by HSE. We actually do it, and we include everybody. But it really, my point was, to what extent I can reliably say that actually the changes that is noticed is due to time or due to the influx of change of people, because it's not the same people. So that's I think the main challenge. Maybe one of the things is we could relate it to the length of their stay in town. So see, the newcomers, that they are new, and then you can distinguish, and then, I don't know, there must be a way of actually engaging this.
Is there, I'm sorry, did you have something, Chris?
No.
My question is a little different, not about technique of sampling, but about people's behavior. If I understand, there's a lot of restrictions in terms of going out, talking to strangers, asking names, that the people might not even feel good or free or open, even if they've been sampled, say, within a house. What is the experience of interviewers? Would they be a separate room, or the father would be sitting next to the interviewed daughter? How does it look like when interviewed? Is it short? Is it long? And how do people behave with interview? Trustworthy, open, closed, frightened, whatever, what experience, how people behave during interview, what's the environment for it?
I think, to be also very honest, when we started this, people were a bit, it was new experience. So, and remember, we were talking about really very close society. So, I just today received a call from a friend of mine saying that actually a couple of people actually knocked at my door and they have a paper with your signature on it. Is it true actually they are representing you or not? I told them yes, they are actually our interviewers in the field. So it just shows you how actually close we are. It's not big community. In fact, they are very. I always have a saying that you either know one. If you don't know the guy, you know his brother or his cousin. So it's very intimate. So things is spread very quickly, and nowadays I think people are more relaxed. Honestly, we get better sense of actually the freedom within, when we conduct the interviews, people really relax and trust it. So we can even ask about things that we could not ask 5 years ago. So I think there's a good progress really. And we put a question that probably we thought at the time was very difficult to ask about homosexuality. Do you actually agree to have homosexual your neighbors? And I remember we had a big debate within our team, should we ask this question or not, because it may put people off, and we went ahead and it didn't really raise any red flag. In fact, people respond to it very naturally, and so it's one of the things that you only learn actually by doing it. But I really think is most of the time the people who are selected are really. Normally, this is how it happens. When we go into a house, people are actually put in what we call it majlis, that's the sitting room, and then the person actually who's supposed to be interviewed comes to that room. Okay?
Alone, so the
Yeah.
father of the family
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
interfere.
No,
so.
no, because it's female to female. You
Okay.
see. If it was male, it's no one. Then you have other guardian present there, you know. Of course, sometimes occasionally other people say, no, I'd like to be there just listening. So we try to convince them if it's better if we, but sometimes it's very difficult to, if the mother wants to stay with the daughter, they just want actually to be there. Sometimes it is. But okay, I think as we go on, I think things hopefully will improve.
Thank you very much, Darwish. By listening to you talk and also to the questions, and particularly Juan, makes me think that all these challenges and different contexts where the usual methodologies that we're used to, that we learn at school, and they don't work, make us be more creative and more ingenious in trying to look for methodological responses. And I would just like to share a very brief anecdote, because this wasn't a formal survey per se. We were interested, a group of people were interested in conducting in-depth interviews in Cuba, where it's just entirely prohibited to conduct this type of exercises. And the methodology was to rent car, to give rides to Cubans from one town to another, and then conduct the in-depth interview on the way, without them actually knowing that they were being interviewed. But this is the kind of methodological creativity that you make of. So you're sitting there, where are you going? I'm going to San Juan, and then you begin to ask them, so how is life? Are you happy? Or what do you think about such and such? And then, have a nice conversation in which the data are actually being recorded. Thank you so much. And let's give